Do you really think you're safe? Because the truth is, sometimes the greatest danger isn't in the dark streets, but inside your own home. There are stories so absurdly real and at the same time so terrifying that they seem like something out of a movie. But they're not. They're facts. Documented cases with witnesses, clues, erased tracks, and screams no one heard in time. The scariest part? Anyone can go through something like this, even you. These experiences didn't happen to fictional characters, but to ordinary people like you and me who were just trying to live their lives. A family camping trip, a walk home, a night sleeping at a friend's house, and suddenly psychological fear takes over. Voices are heard, whispers come from where no one is, people disappear, and the sense of safety you swore you had slips through your fingers like sand. Get ready to hear the 6 most disturbing true stories you've ever heard. Paranormal experiences, mysterious shadows, attempted abductions, unsolved crimes, and traumas that never healed. But I'll warn you now, if you're a light sleeper, you might want to watch this with the lights on. There are encounters that seem ordinary but hide layers that only time can reveal. He went to visit Tom, a childhood friend, one of those who live far away, in the middle of nowhere, in one of those old houses in the interior of Texas. The welcome was warm, full of inside jokes, cold beers, and teenage memories. Everything seemed peaceful. But we know that calm isn't always a sign of safety. That night, after a few extra drinks and lots of laughter, he went to sleep in the guest room. An old room smelling of damp wood and thick silence. The kind of silence that seems to listen to your thoughts. In the middle of the night, something woke him up. It wasn't a specific sound, but a feeling. The kind that chills you to the bone. When he opened his eyes, there it was, a silhouette standing by the door. Tall, still, with the exact shape of a coat hanging on a rack. Except, there wasn't enough light to cast a shadow, and no window was open. He tried to move, but his body was paralyzed, his heart pounding so loudly it sounded like a war drum. He took a deep breath, blinked, and the figure didn't move. It was as if someone, or something, was watching him sleep. The next morning, with sunken eyes and a scrambled mind, he mentioned it to Tom. "I think I saw a coat rack with an overcoat in the room." The answer came quickly and sharply. "I don't own an overcoat, and there's no coat rack in that room." An uncomfortable silence filled the air, and that's when he realized that what lives in that house may not be made only of flesh and bone. Real stories aren't always told out loud. Some prefer to whisper in our heads for years until we give in to fear. And that, my friend, is what we call psychological horror. Many people ignore these signs. They believe it was just a dream, a trick of perception. But there are details the brain doesn't make up. The weight on your chest, the sudden cold, the strange smell in the air. These are paranormal experiences that remind us not everything can be explained. He spent days trying to forget that night, but the discomfort lodged itself in him like an unsettling memory. He started locking doors at night, keeping lights on, avoiding mirrors after midnight. It was as if the invisible danger from the woods was now inside 4 walls. Some witnesses of such events stay silent for years, afraid of sounding crazy. Others share as if lifting a weight from their soul. He decided to speak, and that's when he found out he wasn't alone. Other visitors to that old house also felt presences. One reported hearing a voice mimicking someone calling him in the hallway. Another saw the same silhouette at the same door. These are patterns that can't be explained with logic. But intuition screams, and ignoring it is like playing with fire in a dry forest. This kind of trauma doesn't need screams or blood. Sometimes, the door latch turning on its own is enough. Other times, it's that whisper behind your neck when you know you're alone. It's not monsters that scare us, but the idea that someone or something is watching us as we sleep. The constant surveillance, the feeling of being followed even at home, it messes with your head. It affects sleep, trust, personal safety. And every time we tell one of these real stories, a part of the fear is released, but another part spreads. Some say it's all just illusions, the product of a tired mind or influenced by a horror movie. But what if it's not? What if it's like those real creepypastas that started as rumors and then became police cases? One day you sleep peacefully. The next you feel something lurking in the mysterious shadow behind the door. Your body stiffens, time stops, and only the sound of your own fear keeps you company. And the question that remains is, What exactly was there that night? And more importantly, what did it want? It's in this kind of place that disappearances begin. It may sound like an exaggeration, but it's not. I've seen investigations that started with similar stories. A guest saw something strange, then vanished without a trace. It all starts with a detail, a discomfort, a shiver at the wrong moment. Sometimes the police listen, sometimes they don't. But when the same house gathers multiple occurrences, you can't pretend it's coincidence anymore. The problem is when no one wants to investigate deeply, because the answers may be worse than the questions. The shadow of the silhouette was etched into him like a tattoo on his memory. And no matter how many days passed, he still woke up in the middle of the night, sure that someone was watching him. The emotional disturbance became routine. He couldn't sleep with the door closed, and if he did, he locked it and pushed furniture in front. This isn't an exaggeration. It's the instinctive response of someone who felt danger up close. As the saying goes, the one who saw the wolf doesn't sleep with the door open, especially when the forest of fear is inside your own home. And it was only much later, while listening to a report about unresolved disappearances in the same region, that he connected the dots. It wasn't the first time that house was a setting for mystery, and unfortunately, it might not be the last, because some stories don't end with the sunrise. They continue, hidden behind half-open doors, waiting for a new visit. And sometimes what starts as a simple camping trip between friends ends with marks that time can't erase. Family trips are usually synonymous with peace and good memories. They were excited, ready to explore a remote part of Sweden, a setting that looked like something out of a movie. Tall pine trees, clear skies, a serene lake. They set up camp near the beach, lit a fire, and shared true stories under the stars. But when night fully fell, a strange atmosphere settled in. That forest had a silence that felt too heavy. Unsettling sounds began to sneak through the wind, almost imperceptible at first, but soon became impossible to ignore. And then, everything changed. The two teenage girls in the group, the daughter and her best friend, were inside the tent, giggling quietly when they heard the first metallic sound. Something like chains, or maybe a tool being dragged across the ground. They fell silent, trying to figure out if it was just their imagination or part of the surrounding nature. But then came the footsteps, slow, circling the tent. And suddenly a scream tore through the night, a high-pitched sound, distant, coming from deep within the woods. It didn't sound human, or if it was filled with deep pain. That went beyond any normal nighttime fear. The girls clung to each other, trying to stay calm. They thought about running, but they were far from the car, deep in the forest. They screamed for their parents. The tension turned into panic. The sound of footsteps grew louder, closer. That's when the girls' father came out with a flashlight in hand, trying to find what was out there. He saw nothing, but everyone heard it. The dry snap of a branch, the rustling of leaves. Something was there, something that knew how to hide. The mother called the police. The operator, initially skeptical, changed his tone when she described the sounds. The patrol car arrived too quickly, as if it had already been nearby. And that's when what was just a paranormal experience turned into an investigation, because the officers chased someone through the forest. A man, maybe two, zigzagging between the trees. Intruders. But the forest was too dense, and they disappeared as if they were shadows. The case was filed as a failed kidnapping attempt, but no one slept that night. Days later, still disturbed, they decided to research the region, and that's when they found the most sinister part. That forest was known for old stories of disappearances. Men who vanished without a trace, cases still considered unsolved crimes. One of them happened exactly on the same beach where they had camped. Coincidence? Maybe. But it's hard to believe that when you go through such an experience. Their intuition said otherwise. Something there didn't want to be found. The most unsettling part? Nothing was taken. No belongings were missing. But the clear sensation remained that someone or something wanted to scare them, to dominate them through psychological fear. The disturbing sounds, the mysterious shadow among the trees, the way the flashlight seemed to fail near certain parts of the forest, it was as if the place itself was repelling them. The feeling of being watched persisted even after they left. And the daughter, for months, avoided places with heavy vegetation. The trauma was imprinted on her. What was supposed to be just a family outing became a turning point, the kind of story you tell as a warning. And as much as it might seem like an exaggeration, there are witnesses. It's not an urban legend nor a made-up creepypasta. These are real stories with too many details to be coincidence. The police didn't solve it, no one was arrested, and the forest, to this day, keeps its mysteries. They returned home, but something from that night came back with them. An emotional disturbance that reappeared every time the lights went out. And then that nighttime fear shows up in small things. Locking the doors twice, checking the windows even when there's no wind, installing security cameras not out of caution, but out of emotional necessity. And then the question remains, who was hiding in that forest? A stranger, a criminal, or something beyond our understanding? Whoever it was, they knew how to move like a predator, chose the right moment, knew the woods, and the scariest part seemed to enjoy the fear. Paranormal experiences often leave invisible but deep marks. And for this family, that's exactly what happened. The father never went camping again. The mother sleeps with her phone in hand as if waiting for help had become her new habit. The daughter, now a teenager, avoids talking about it. But one night, she wrote everything in a journal. She spoke of the mimicked voice she heard among the trees, a voice that said her name, but no one else had heard it. She is certain something tried to lure her out of the tent, alone. And what if she had gone out? What if the scream was just a distraction? These questions never left their minds. Because when psychological terror takes hold, the forest stays inside you. And no matter how hard you try to forget, certain nights insist on returning. Some doors never fully close again. And sometimes, it all starts with a simple walk among seemingly harmless trees. When you hear camping stories, you expect funny tales or, at most, a surprise storm. But what if the sea breeze brings more than just the smell of salt? On that same beach in the Swedish forest, 2 men disappeared years earlier without a trace. The tents were found intact, the campfire still burning, backpacks with everything inside, but they vanished like smoke in the wind. The investigations made no progress, and over time they became statistics. But those who have been there and felt that heavy atmosphere know the mystery goes much deeper. These unsolved crimes share something disturbing, the feeling that nothing is exactly what it seems, as if the place were shrouded in an invisible veil where time and space bend. You can step on the same sand, hear the same unsettling sounds, and not know you're inches away from where something terrible happened. It's in that kind of place that invisible danger hides best. And the police, no matter how well equipped, sometimes simply can't find answers. Because maybe the answers aren't on the physical plane. The real stories that emerged after these disappearances have something in common: the constant presence of a mysterious shadow during camping nights. Some witnesses reported silhouettes standing between the trees, watching from a distance. Others heard the tent zipper being tampered with, even with no one around. Teenagers swear they heard voices being mimicked, and this isn't just imagination. These are recurring paranormal experiences, as if the place holds echoes of what happened, or worse, as if what caused it is still there. Those who disappeared were strong men, used to trails, prepared. And that's precisely what's frightening. They weren't easy victims. One was a retired soldier, the other a wilderness tour guide. They weren't supposed to vanish without a trace. There were no signs of struggle, no footprints, not even steps leading into the forest, as if the ground had swallowed them. Investigators were left with no leads, and the local community, though silent, began to avoid the area. Collective intuition knows things. When even the locals stop camping there, it's a warning sign. These disappearances left marks on the region, not physical ones, but emotional. Parents avoid taking their children there. Local schools no longer organize field trips. Those who work in tourism try to avoid the topic. But now and then, another case arises. Someone saw a shadow, heard footsteps, or ran back from the woods without knowing why. It's not coincidence, it's a pattern. And patterns matter. They tell us that something is at work there. Maybe a cycle, maybe a presence. Either way, the mystery remains open. Some say these disappearances are part of something bigger, a kind of dark cycle involving specific areas of the planet, places where logic doesn't apply easily. Old houses, dense forests, deep lakes, territories where the laws of nature seem flexible, as if certain regions operate under different rules. That campsite became more than just a bad memory. It became the center of a riddle, and the more people investigate, the more disturbing everything becomes. The truth perhaps isn't bearable for everyone. For some human behavior specialists, these cases provoke more than fear. They provoke obsession. The father of the girl who lived through the night in the forest began compulsively researching unsolved crimes. He discovered there are dozens of similar cases at campsites around the world. Disappearances in areas with the same profile, isolated, forested, with a history of paranormal experiences. He started sleeping less, installed cameras at home, reinforced the family's personal security, not because he expected an attack, but because he no longer trusted what was invisible. And that's the most frightening feeling. Not knowing where the danger comes from. One day you're laughing with friends, grilling by the beach. The next, you're plunged into a psychological terror that follows you for the rest of your life. The trauma seeps into daily life. Footsteps behind you, shadows in the mirror, the constant sensation of being watched. It's not an exaggeration, it's a human response to the unknown. And the more the mind tries to understand, the more it suffers. The body reacts with insomnia, tension, distrust. Nighttime fear becomes your new normal. These mysteries feed something beyond fright. They feed an existential doubt. What exists in the world that we can't see? What hides in the margins of time? When the police close the case, it doesn't die. It becomes a living legend. The witnesses keep telling the stories, even if no one wants to hear. But someone is always listening. A curious person, an investigator, a survivor, and those voices keep the real stories alive, as warnings, as reminders that the forest doesn't forget. And then an inevitable question arises. Were those who disappeared taken by someone or by something? Because one thing is certain, the place remains the same. The beach, the woods, the sound of the wind. But the energy there has changed, and with each new camp, the shadow seems to be waiting, silent, watchful, and perhaps ready to reveal itself again. Some childhood memories don't need photographs to be etched in your mind. Two children brothers shared a room in an old house with a narrow hallway and creaky floors. The night was silent, as if the world outside had been turned off. They slept peacefully until they heard a familiar voice calling. "Boys, come downstairs." It was their mother, or at least it sounded like her. But there was something strange in that tone. It was slower, a bit too dry, as if someone was imitating her, but couldn't quite capture the emotion. The younger brother got up and walked to the bedroom door. He opened it slowly, the latch clicking through the silence like a razor. He looked down the hallway and saw a silhouette standing still, a woman. She called again with the same voice. "Come, sweetheart." But the living room light was off, and their mother never called them in the dark. The boy stood frozen, petrified. He felt the nighttime fear take over his body like a cold wave. He couldn't understand, but his instinct said, "Don't go." The older brother got up and pulled his sibling back. They locked the door. That voice called 2 more times and then disappeared. When morning came, they told their parents everything. But something in their reaction was even more frightening than the experience itself. The father avoided looking into the boy's eyes. The mother simply said, "It was just a nightmare, that's all." And they never spoke of it again, as if they wanted to bury the memory. But the boys knew what they had heard. A child's intuition is powerful. It picks up on what adults have learned to ignore. This kind of paranormal experience tends to leave marks. The younger ones slept with the light on for years. The older started checking doors and windows every night. Even without a clear explanation, both carried the trauma like part of their body. And worse, they started hearing unsettling sounds now and then, like whispers behind the door. It was as if the imitated voice had lingered there, waiting for another chance, another invitation, something or someone trying to get in. These real stories, as disturbing as they may seem, are more common than we think. Many accounts speak of familiar voices calling from strange places, in old houses, forests, even in isolated campsites. Always with the same pattern. The call comes when you're vulnerable, and it almost always tries to lure you away from safety. It's a kind of psychological terror that tests the limits of reason. The sound is too perfect, but it lacks soul, it lacks life. It's a copy, but a wrong copy. The human mind, especially in childhood, records these experiences in a raw way, without filters. That's why the effects are long-lasting. The brothers, now adults, avoid talking about it, but they both remember every detail. The position of the shadow, the exact tone of the voice, the chill in their stomachs, and the feeling of invisible danger, as if something wanted to pretend to be someone they loved. That kind of fear is the cruelest, because it contaminates good memories with a constant doubt. Was it really my mother that night? Over the years, the two brothers searched for answers. They researched phenomena, watched documentaries, even ended up in real creepypasta forums. They found identical accounts, people on the other side of the world describing the same thing: an imitated voice, a calling, a presence standing in the dark. And that helped them in a way. They discovered they weren't alone, that their experience was part of a larger pattern, a puzzle still far from being fully assembled. It's curious how memory works. They remember the smell of the hallway, the sound of the wind at the window, but the most striking thing is still the sound of that voice. So familiar, so wrong. It changed the way they deal with personal security to this day. They installed cameras, they have locks on every door, and even as adults, they still get chills when someone unexpectedly calls their names, because deep down, they learn that not every voice we love should be followed. Stories like this show us that danger can be disguised as affection, that what seems safe isn't always so, and that trusting your senses too much can put you at risk. The silhouettes standing in the dark, the door latch turning for no reason, the soft call in the middle of the night, they're clues. Warnings, as if the invisible world were trying to cross the veil that separates it from ours. And sometimes it succeeds, even if only for a few seconds, seconds that stay with you forever. The most unsettling part is that the parents never explained anything. They never denied it, but they never confirmed it either, as if they knew more than they let on, and that omission became a shadow inside the children. Something unresolved, something that on specific nights seems to come back. Maybe it's just a memory, or maybe it's something waiting for the next open window. Because once you hear the calling, it never fully goes silent again. It was just a walk home, one of those routine ones, unhurried. A teenage girl was coming back from school, one earbud in, backpack on her back, distracted by her own thoughts. The neighborhood was calm, familiar, nothing that seemed threatening. But that day, something was different. A presence, a constant gaze coming from somewhere behind. She tried to ignore it. Intuition hit first. Someone is following me. And when intuition speaks, it's best to listen. It's not drama. It's a warning. She crossed the street, looked discreetly behind her, and there he was. A man, seemingly ordinary, walking at the same pace, keeping the same distance. So far, it could have been a coincidence. But when he called her by name, her blood ran cold. She had never seen him before. He smiled, like someone who feels entitled to invade others' personal space, and he said things no outsider should know. The name of her school, her parents, even what time she got home. His voice was soft, but something was wrong. Something disturbing. She quickened her pace. So did he. Then she started running. Her heart pounded so hard it felt like it would explode. She screamed, ran into a nearby store, and locked herself in the back restroom. The employee, seeing the panic on her face, called the police immediately. By the time the officers arrived, the man was no longer around. But what he left behind was enough to change everything. Because that was clearly an attempted abduction. A stranger who knew too much. An invisible danger that now had a face. The police heard the report and reinforced the call for awareness in the neighborhood. The girl became a witness in a possible crime. But the scare didn't end there. That same night, her mother heard a noise in the yard. She went to the window and saw the same man standing near the fence as if waiting. This time, the home's security cameras captured everything, and it was enough to understand he knew where they lived. He had come back, and he wasn't going to give up easily. The next day, they changed their entire routine. The walk from school was canceled. The mother started picking her up every day. They installed more cameras, reinforced latches, changed the locks. The house became a fortress. But the fortress wasn't enough to protect from the trauma. Nighttime fear took over the teenager. Unsettling sounds now seemed to come from all directions. Every shadow was a threat, every noise on the street a warning, and what once was safety turned into paranoia. This kind of psychological terror is silent, but devastating. There are no monsters or ghosts. There's something worse. People. People with hidden intentions behind ordinary faces. And often, the danger walks beside us without us noticing. That's why personal safety isn't an exaggeration. It's a necessity. Cameras, alarms, emergency protocols, all of it makes a difference. And most importantly, listening to your own intuition. If something feels wrong, it probably is. The teenager was never the same again. Even with the suspect's arrest weeks later, the fear remained. The trauma became part of her routine. She started observing everything more closely, being suspicious of movements around her, preparing herself. And that, although sad, is a kind of strength. Strength born from pain. That turns victims into survivors. The emotional disturbance, though cruel, also teaches. And the lesson is clear. Danger can be where you least expect it. Curiously, after the incident, other girls in the neighborhood reported similar stories. A strange man asking questions, following from a distance, watching. The case was no longer isolated and became part of a larger investigation. A pattern began to emerge. Unsolved crimes, old reports, ignored accounts, and then everything made sense. The problem already existed. It had just been invisible until someone screamed loud enough. Her voice was that scream. What's most striking is how, even with everything documented, many people still doubt. They say it's an exaggeration, a made-up story. But those who went through it carry the real weight of the experience. It's an invisible wound, but a deep one. Today, she helps other teenage girls understand warning signs. She participates in campaigns, gives talks, teaches what she had to learn the hard way, because sharing real stories can save lives, and staying silent can cost too much. And since then, she lives with eyes wide open. The city's forest can be as dark as a dense jungle. Danger sometimes dresses as normality, and the question that echoes is, how many other intruders are still out there, lurking, waiting for an opportunity? You can forget a place, you can even forget faces. But what true fear does to the mind, that, my friend, doesn't go away. Psychological terror doesn't scream, it whispers. And when it whispers, it goes straight to the soul. After experiencing paranormal events or escaping attempted abductions, the mind never returns to its original state. It's like a cracked mirror. It still reflects, but never the same way again. Many who have gone through real stories like these say they no longer have a normal life. They have an alert life. Lasting fear infiltrates daily life like a silent intruder. It's in the details, in how someone checks the window 3 times before bed, how they avoid walking alone, how they never camp anywhere again. The trauma shapes new habits, even if no one around notices. It's not just a bad memory, it's a defense system that activates automatically. The body begins to respond to unsettling sounds with tremors. The mind creates scenarios of invisible danger, even in the most ordinary situations. That's why many survivors of intense experiences become more introspective, more vigilant, not out of weakness, but out of adaptation. The teenage girl who was followed by a stranger now studies martial arts. The brothers who heard the imitated voice became obsessed with personal security. The man who saw the silhouette at his friend's house never slept away from home again. Each found a way to cope, but none of them forgot. And maybe that's the point. Emotional memory doesn't have an off switch. Emotional disturbance manifests in different ways. Some cry when they hear a sound like the one from the forest. Some avoid talking about certain places, even if everyone says there's nothing wrong there. And that's the problem. Many people don't take it seriously. But if you talk to someone who's been through it, you'll see it's not an exaggeration. These are real accounts, consistent with deep marks. And often, these traumas are only treated years later when they've already turned into chronic anxiety or insomnia. The cruelest thing about psychological fear is that it doesn't need a present aggressor. A memory is enough. A shadow at the corner of your eye, a doorknob slowly turning, a familiar scent in a place where no one should be. The body reacts as if it were yesterday, as if the danger were there again. And that's why it's so important to recognize this kind of suffering, because it's not visible. It doesn't bleed, but it corrodes from within, slowly. And it changes who you are. Some people, trying to move on, start writing. They turn their experiences into real creepypastas, as if putting it on paper could extract the fear from the body. Others become researchers. They dive into investigations of disappearances, mysteries, paranormal phenomena. They seek to understand what happened to them or to those who never came back. It's a way to regain control, to find meaning, and sometimes to warn others. This could happen to anyone. The forest, the old house, the campsite become internal symbols, spaces that represent more than a setting. They're portals to that specific moment when everything changed. That's why many avoid certain words, songs, objects, they're triggers, keys that open doors they'd rather keep shut. But ignoring the trauma only strengthens its shadow. Facing it is the only path, and for that, courage is needed. Not the courage to face monsters, but to face oneself. In the long run, what defines those who've been through these experiences isn't the fear itself, but what they do with it. Some become mentors, sharing their stories to prevent others from suffering the same. Others withdraw, protecting themselves in silence. Both are valid, both are trying to survive, and most importantly, both have something to teach. Because paranormal experiences, abduction attempts, or unresolved disappearances aren't just horror plots. They're human scars that demand listening, empathy, and attention. When someone says they're afraid to sleep or that they have a gut feeling something's wrong, it's worth listening closely. It might seem like an exaggeration, but sometimes it's the body remembering something the mind tried to forget. Psychological fear is a silent watchman. It doesn't want to interfere, it wants to protect. But when it becomes constant, it turns into a prison. That's why recognizing the trauma and seeking help is as important as locking the front door at night. Emotional safety is also a form of survival, and even after years, a single detail is enough to reignite everything. A familiar voice, a known sound, a forgotten scent. The brain doesn't forget. It just stores things in hidden compartments. And when those drawers open without warning, the forest returns, the shadow reappears, the feeling of being watched comes back in full force. That's when we understand. Some experiences don't end. They just change form, waiting for a new chapter. Now tell me, after hearing these stories, do you still believe that danger always has a face? Or that locking the doors is enough to stay safe? What we've seen here aren't just accounts of psychological terror, they're warnings. Echoes of something greater that surrounds us and often goes unnoticed. And the question that lingers is, how many of these situations could have been avoided if someone had paid attention to the signs? Have you been listening to your intuition? Have you been checking what seems too normal? Have you thought about your personal safety, physical, emotional, spiritual? Sometimes the difference between being saved and being lost lies in a detail. In a silhouette no one saw. In a doorknob turning at night. And maybe, just maybe, this video awakened something in you that had been asleep. And now I invite you, share in the comments if any of these stories reminded you of something you've lived or almost lived. Which of these situations gave you the biggest chills? And most importantly, what are you going to do with what you learned here today? Because ignoring is never the best choice. If this made you think differently, if any part touched you, if it opened your eyes, subscribe to the channel right now. Turn on the notification bell to keep receiving content that no one else dares to show. Here we talk about mystery, fear, and truth with no filters. And believe me, we still have so much to reveal.